We all, brothers and sisters, this past week watched, if you will, in utter horror and disgust as Spring Valley High School resource officer Ben Fields violently turned a black female youth over in her chair, ripped her from her seat, and flung her across the room, where he commenced to handcuff her and arrest her for refusing to leave the room. This gross act of brutality is just the latest in a string of extreme and abusive law enforcement perpetrated, if you will, against people of color. Although this latest incident did not end in the tragic death of this young girl, it does not take away from the fact of the escalating rise of violence that is dished out by those who have been sworn by oath to serve and protect. The extreme use of force by the police towards people of color seems to be perpetrated on a daily basis, as somewhere in America in particular, someone with a mobile phone captures video footage of an all too familiar occurrence within the black community. With the rise of police violence and injustices against people of color and the subsequent rise of protest marches, the Black Lives Matter activist movement was birthed. Primarily based in the United States, Black Lives Matter campaigns against police brutality toward African Americans. And shortly after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, the movement began with the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter on Twitter and other social media platforms. The overall Black Lives Matter movement is a decentralized network. In other words, it has no formal hierarchy or no formal structure. The movement then received fresh impetus from the 2014 deaths of Michael Brown that resulted in protests and unrest in Ferguson, Missouri, and the death of Eric Garner in New York City. In both cases, brothers and sisters, you are well aware by now that the grand jury did not indict the officers, and no criminal charges were brought to bear. Several other African Americans who died at the hands of police officers have had their deaths protested by the Black Lives Matter movement, including little brother Tamir Rice, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Jonathan Farrell, and Freddie Gray, just to name a few. Although Black Lives Matter is more a movement than it is an organization, it has recently come under fire by some of the mainstream media and others who view it as a separatist movement designed to place special light on black lives and no one else. Bishop, where you going, and what does this have to do with Psalm 139? Lean on somebody and tell them, let's pray him through. Yeah, many people have responded to the Black Lives Matter movement by countering with the phrase, all lives matter. They counter with that in hopes of helping those of the movement to understand the fact that all lives do in fact matter. Others have questioned and challenged the validity of the term all lives matter. In particular, on Real Time with Bill Maher, for example, he expressed his support for the Black Lives Matter phrase, arguing that all lives matter implies that all lives are equally at risk, when in fact they are not. Founders have responded to criticism of the movement's exclusivity, saying Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that your life isn't important, but it means that black lives which are seen without value within white supremacy are important to our liberation. Yeah, lean on somebody and tell them black lives really do matter. Recently, our President Barack Obama spoke to the debate between the phrase Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter when he said, I think the reason that the organizers used the phrase Black Lives Matter was not because they were suggesting that no one else's lives matter, but rather what they were suggesting is that there is a specific problem that is happening in the context of the African American community that is not happening in any other communities. And that, brothers and sisters, is the legitimate issue that we must address. Yeah, we look now at the escalating rise of police violence against persons of color, and the unjust system that continues to allow the police and others to get away with killing young African American males and females in our community. It paints the dreaded picture that the lives of African Americans are without value. Lest I bore you with the latest news briefs and issues pertaining to the Black Lives Matter movement, the reality of the existence of the Black Lives Matter movement brings now into focus a bigger picture of the widespread dehumanization and devalue of human life. Lean on somebody and tell him he's getting ready to connect it now. It's not just the police brutality in our communities, but it is also mass shootings around the country. Yeah, the perpetual violence in the Middle East, the rise of the ISIS terrorist movement, the Syrian conflict, and the unrest among the Soviet Union states. It's also the rise of even the terrorist activity in our native homeland, as young girls are kidnapped, raped, and sold into slavery in Africa. Yeah, it's the escalating black on black death toll in our inner cities among our youth in cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and New York. It's the ever-growing even white-on-white crime and killings, watch this, that far exceed the percentages of black-on-black deaths, but we never hear about the white-on-white crimes as much as we do the black-on-black crimes in the news media. It's the alarming rate of violence in our schools, of assaults both against students and teachers, as video footage of fights and altercations are posted on World Star and YouTube and other social media outlets for likes and the number of views and ratings and popularity, as violence against against others is no longer viewed as disgust, but it now holds entertainment value. Yeah, I've come today, Temple of Refuge, because we can't just vacillate behind the four walls of the church and shout and give God praise and act like what's happening out there is not affecting our personal lives. And one of the reasons it's affecting us is that we've lost sight of the value of human life.